Hlekani bakokwane. Greetings from Musoni. Ntukulu wabangoni nibandao. Welcome to AI, Ancestral Intelligence with Musoni. Today I want to talk about remarks from an archaeologist named Alejandra when he reacted to 8th Dynasty official Shemai's CT scan, where the anthropologists revealed that he was black, basically. For those that do not know the video, we'll start with the video.
But the CT scan has one more surprise for Alejandro: Shemai's ethnicity.
Well, they have just told me that Shemai had Nubian features, which means that their ruling family was probably Nubian, and that was unexpected.
Examining Shemai's anatomy closely, the thickness of his bones and the shape of his nasal cavity, the anthropologists think he was a black African, likely from neighboring Nubia. A huge revelation that challenges the prevailing image of the Egyptian ruling class.
We always thought the ancient Egyptian elite were Mediterranean type, and in this sense, Shemai is representing the society of the frontier, in which different ethnic groups were mixed. At the end, it doesn't matter the color of your skin. Shemai was Egyptian.
So the CT scan was of the mummy of 8th Dynasty official and vizier Shemai. And archaeologist Alejandra is surprised that Shemai was black. But I'm surprised that he's surprised because Alejandra is supposed to be a scholar. Because a sound scholar is not supposed to be one-dimensional. When you study any subject is incomplete when you do not incorporate and engage other disciplines around the subject. So a sound archaeologist will engage linguistics, will engage anthropology, and other disciplines around the subject. So what I'm about to present now are anthropological studies which Alejandra should have known about. I only expect a layperson to actually think that the ancient Egyptians are supposed to be the Mediterranean type. The discussion around the race and ethnicity of the ancient Egyptians is often disingenuous because people act like the civilization of Kemet did not exist for over 3,000 years, and act like great civilizations like that will not attract people from foreign lands who can become citizens and can become officials and etc. Because in African culture and tradition, restrictions of office are usually only in the area of royalty, where the royalty has to come from a specific bloodline and other factors involved. So the accurate discussion around the race and ethnicity of the ancient Egyptians should not be whether the ancient Egyptians were black, because there were ancient Egyptians who came from foreign lands who became citizens and officials, and they would be buried and mummified and also have statues and things like that. So they would become ancient Egyptians as well, just like American. The term American is not racial. Therefore, the only important question around the ethnicity and race of the ancient Egyptians should be what was the ethnicity or race of the founders of the civilization. With that being said, here is one of the anthropological studies on pre-dynastic ancient Kemet. This is a paper authored by Dr. Keita, Studies of Ancient Crania from Northern Africa. And the keywords is Maghreb, Badari, Carthage, pre-dynastic Egyptian, Africoid, discriminant function. In the abstract, the underlined part, it states early southern pre-dynastic Egyptian crania show tropical African affinities, displaying chroniometric trends that differ notably from the coastal northern African pattern. For those that are not familiar with anthropology, it's a discipline or a study of the skulls. They basically do certain measurements of the skulls to determine relationships between groups of people. And because in its history, just like all other disciplines, racist Europeans have used the discipline to portray certain racist theories. They think that the actual discipline is irrelevant, but that is not the case. There is generally nothing wrong with the actual discipline, but the issue is mainly the interpretation by the scholars. One of those problems is the Eurocentric idea that a true Negro is supposed to fall within specific parameters. Let's read. True Negro is a term not often used in current writing, but occasionally still finds its way into literature. For example, De Villiers, 1968. Clearly, the morphology matrix denoted in this term concept presents a microevolutionary extreme, not to be taken as a basal ideal type, just as very orthognathes, excuse the pronunciation, blonde Northern European groups represent an extreme. There are many true forms. Skeletally Negroid cannot be restricted to a monotypic extreme concept. Kuhn et al. 1950 notes groups who have almost stereotypical tropical African soft part characteristics coupled with Mediterranean bony craniofacial form, but they do not report the reverse. So the problem is not the study, like they are hiding, for example, here, skulls which fit into the Negroid characteristics or the Negroid type, but were found in the Mediterranean. Those were not reported. So the problem with the Eurocentric anthropology in terms of not the actual study or the test is in the conclusion of the results, the interpretation. So, for example, he says here that the way Europeans expect a Negro to have a broad nose, for example. So when we speak of broad nose or a flat nose or whatnot, that is strictly a Negroid characteristic, yes. But it is the extreme, it is not the only characteristic, because we have many black people with type of noses which can be classified as non-Negroid. Like I also have a similar type. You're probably not going to be able to see because you're only seeing me from the front. And the equivalent of Africans doing the same thing would be if we do anthropology and we find Europeans that are not blonde, and we're not going to classify them as Europeans or white because they are not blonde. Those with black hair will not be classified as white. And the craziest part also is that genetically, Africans are the most diverse people. Europeans And Asians usually are very similar to each other. Africans are wide when it comes to similarities. There is so much variations. No group of people on earth have as much variation genetically and in terms of physical characteristics as Africans. For obvious reasons, we are the original people. And so Europeans inherit their what they call a European type nose. They inherited it from Africans. So how can you liken, you say that a child gave characteristics to a parent. A parent is the one that the child inherited from the parent. So some of the misconceptions, Eurocentric misconceptions, end up in the interpretation of the actual data. The data is not the problem, but the interpretation. So, for example, if you look at the profile of Pharaoh Menkaure, you look at his side profile, you look at the nose, a lot of people look at that and say he was not black. But I have a similar profile. My profile, the nose, the shape of my nose is not what these Eurocentric anthropologists or Eurocentrics would classify as true Negro. If they couldn't see my hair and skin color, they could easily classify me as Asiatic. And this is quite the same with so many groups in Africa, people from Rwanda, all over East Africa, Kenya and all that. The Maasai people also have a similar profile. The Fulani in West Africa have a exact similar profile, which these Eurocentric anthropologists would not interpret as true Negro and would classify it outside of that. Now that we've dealt with that part in clarifying the misconceptions and the problems around anthropology, we can look at the data. And it says here, analysis of Egyptian crania are numerous. Verkouter or Verkouter, however it's pronounced, 1978 notes that the ancient Egyptian crania have frequently all been lumped implicitly or explicitly as Mediterranean. Although Negroid remains are recorded in substantial numbers by many workers. However it's pronounced, 1901 concludes that the pre-dynastic people were blending in various proportions of Semite Negro. That's where the interpretation also comes in. What you consider mixed, and I'm not mixed, and I showed you my profile, and they would probably classify me as mixed. And I'm not mixed at all. I'm pure Bantu. Myers in Pearson et al. 1902-3 describes morphological variability in pre-dynastic crania as ranging from Negroid to Mediterranean to argue against the claims of homogeneity. So that's where the interpretation comes in. When you have a preconceived idea of what a true Negro is supposed to look like, then you will interpret it as such. But what Dr. Keita presents in the article, in his paper, is a more objective method of analysis and evaluation of the results. So instead of taking measurements and saying these belong to this race and this does not belong to that race, as we know, race is not a scientific factor, because in the definition of race, all black people are supposed to have true Negro phenotypes. But we know in reality there is no such thing, because Africans are the most diverse. We are actually more, as African people, we are so different from each other that the concept of race would classify all black people in Africa as coming from different races. They've done it with some of the groups, like the Khoi people, the Kwe people, of Southern Africa, and also your East Africans like Ethiopians and whatnot. So the most objective method is not to take measurements and then conclude based on your preconceptions, but to actually sample different groups and then look at affinity between the groups and see which groups cluster more together than the other groups, because that cannot be influenced by misconceptions, because the measurements will show you who is closer related in terms of affinity. And Nata 1958 and Strawhall 1968-1971 and Angel 1972, Stroll 1971 also analyzed hair in the study of 117 Badari crania. Before I continue, I'd like to explain what Badari is to bring the discussion into context so that we're all on the same page. Badari is an area in southern Egypt or Upper Egypt, an area next to Abydos and Nakada. These are the sites where pre-dynastic culture was found, which has continuity of those pre-dynastic culture was found in dynastic Kemet. And so they analyzed here in the study of 117 Badari crania, in which he concluded that more than 80% were Negroid. Most of these were interpreted as being hybrids. Gardner 1961 reports that northern pre-dynastic series are less Negroid than those from the south. Earlier metric work frequently used the problematic and discredited coefficient of racial likeness. That is what Dr. Keita is talking about as well. What I was talking about, racial likeness, is when you look at the data and then you interpret it based on your misconceptions. Now let us look at a more accurate method. In Makareji et al. 1955, where the generalized distance in Mahalanobis was used. This is where accuracy comes in, or objectivity. The Badari series can be noted from the matrix to be more similar to numerous tropical African series than to dynastic ones. Nakada crania were most similar to Nubian and Tigrian Ethiopian series. Nada using 1958 using the Penrose statistic demonstrated that the Nakada 1 and Badari crania, these two pre-dynastic sites, both regarded as Negroid, were almost identical, and that these two were identical, and that these were most similar to the Negroid Nubian series from Kerma, studied by Collette 1933. I'm going to bring that into context quickly. Collette, not accepting variability, excluded clear Negro crania found in the Kerma series from her analysis, as did Moharant, implying that they were foreign. Remember what Alejandro said? That, or even the anthropologists in the video, they said that Shemai had a Nubian feature, likely coming from neighboring Nubia, because in their preconceived ideas, he could not have been indigenous Egyptian because of his features. And that is scientifically flawed. Christian 1966 in racial comparison study found the combined Nakada series to diverge towards the tropical African series from Kenya, but still to be more similar to a composed southern dynastic series comprising 3rd to 30th dynasty Abydos crania. He notes that the Kenyan group may have been an inappropriate comparative series. preconceived ideas, thus disavowing typological thinking, and states that a Nubian series may have been a better choice for comparative Negroid people. So Nakada, there next to the Red Sea, next to Abydos in Upper Egypt, the study showed that they are, in terms of affinity, the skulls found there were closer to the people of Kerma. They're close to the third cataract, that is the people of Sudan, and also the people of Kenya in East Africa. He was not happy with the finding because it messes up with these preconceived ideas, cognitive dissonance. So we continue with the more objective methodology. And what you're looking at, table 2B, is the analysis by centroid values. It's one of the methods. The test of significance of the Mahalanobis distances between group centroids shows them all to be significantly different, except between Karma, which is Nubian or Sudanese, and Nakada, which is pre-dynastic Egypt or Kemet. In all of the analysis in between the E and Maghreb, which is your Berber groups and whatnot series in the 7-variable run. So you can see there is affinity between the Karma and Nakada when we're using centroid values. By the way, these are the groups that have been sampled here. And using the same samples, just using a different method of comparison. It states the unknown analysis of the Maghreban crania shows many to be more similar to Northern Europeans, segment and E series, but the presence of tropical phenotypes is notable. 13 to 17% classified into the European series, table 5. The Badari crania have a monometric phenotype that is clearly southern. Most classify into Kerma, which is Nubian, and Gabon and Kenyan groups. When lay-by variables in the Nubian and Nakada series are eliminated from this analysis in the 11-variable design, greater than 50% of the Badarian crania classify into the equatorial African groups, table 6. No Badarian cranium in any analysis classified into the European series, and a few grouped with the E series in another analysis without Nakada or any dynastic Egyptians. This result was repeated. So we can see the analysis and interpretation, or the comparisons, the affinity, the results show that pre-dynastic Kemet, in terms of the sites that have been identified to have cultural continuity into dynastic Kemet, Nakada, and Badari, these continue to cluster with Nubians, with Kenyans, and other groups of tropical Africa. This is, of course, testing the anthropology using different methods of comparison, and with all the comparisons done, none of the Badarian crania classify with groups outside of Africa, but always consistently cluster with your tropical Africans. Let us continue. I'm going to read from top left, the part highlighted in yellow. Might not be clear to you depending on your eyesight. Cultural evidence for south to north migration of ideas and or people includes Arkell's 1975 demonstration of Badari pottery's derivation from the Khartoum Mesolithic, although Saharan related to Khartoum. Khartoum is the capital of Sudan. Origins are equally likely. Excavators Brunton and Caton Thompson, 1928, thought that Badarians had come from the south. This is, of course, consistent with the fact that dynastic Kemet, or the founder of dynastic Kemet, Pharaoh Nama, or whatever name you use, he came from the south and conquered the king in the north. Let's continue. The pre-dynastic remains from the south. Badari and early Nakada, these two, have been noted to be broadly Negroid by several previous workers. Casual inspections of these remains a morphological perspective confirms this. See, although we've discussed the idea of which skulls are Negroid and which ones are not, there were others in the early 1900s that actually interpreted the skulls as Negroid. But what's more important, again, is the affinity. The affinity of these ancient Egyptian skulls or pre-dynastic Kemet have affinity with tropical Africans, which today are called Subsaharan African, which is also a very delinquent term. Let's move over to the right of the column, the blue section. There's little demarcation between pre-dynastics and tropical series and even the early southern dynastic series. So what that means is there is little demarcation, or there's difference. They cluster together, the pre-dynastics, the early dynastics from the south, and modern tropical Africans. They cluster together. Definite trends are discernible in the analysis. This broadly shared southern metric pattern, along with the other mentioned characteristics to a greater or lesser degree, might be better described by the term Africoid, by definition connoting a tropical African microclade and microadaptation and patristic affinity, thereby avoiding the non-evolutionary term Negroid, allowing for variation both real and conceptual. In conclusion, I'm only going to read the underlined part. The Upper Nile Valley series shows close affinities. Upper Nile Valley is the south of Egypt, southern Egypt, or Egypt South. Series shows close affinities to one another, which is your Nakada, your Badari, as we've seen in the analysis. They cluster together. And to tropical African series, which is your so-called Sub-Saharan African. Thus, variation is also present in the Egyptian Nile Valley, as the northern pattern trend is distinguishable from the southern one. So the northern ancient Egyptians are completely different from the southern ancient Egyptians. The Badari and Nakada one cranial patterns emerge as tropical African variants with Kerma. So Badari and Nakada, who are the founding pre-dynastic cultures of what we call dynastic Kemet, all the important cultural elements, the major cultural elements that come into what is called dynastic Kemet or dynastic Egypt come from Badari and Nakada, and these cranial patterns emerge as tropical African, or what Eurocentrics would call Subsaharan Africa variants with Kerma, which is Sudan. Badari remains show little affinity to the mass of Maghreban crania. So in conclusion, anthropological evidence shows that the founders, pre-dynastic Kemet, the founders of the culture of ancient Egypt, were black people. Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and share the video. From me, Musoni, peace and African power.